The kitchen smelled like rosemary and butter and the kind of memories that don't belong to me. I was standing at the marble island in my mother's house in Greenwich, plating 32 individual crab cakes for the engagement party of a woman I had met exactly twice. My sister-in-law, technically. My brother's fiancé, officially. A stranger, functionally. My back ached from the 4-hour drive up from the city and the 3 hours I had already spent at the stove, and somewhere in the great room I could hear my mother's voice doing the thing it does when she's performing for company. She just adores being in the kitchen, always has, even as a little girl. I had not always adored being in the kitchen. As a little girl, I had wanted to be an architect, then a marine biologist, then, briefly and embarrassingly, a horse trainer. What I had adored eventually was building something with my own hands that no one in this house had any idea how to take from me. But my mother could not say that. My mother could only say I adored the kitchen because that was the only version of me she had ever been able to fit inside her head. A woman with very smooth hair drifted in holding an empty wine glass. She looked at me the way you look at the hostess of a restaurant when you're hoping she's the manager. "Could I trouble you for another Pinot? My husband's the one in the blue jacket." "Of course," I said, "because what else do you say?" I poured the Pinot. I carried it out. I came back. I plated the rest of the crab cakes. I did not say that my husband, technically a fiancé as of 6 weeks ago, was somewhere on a job site in Brooklyn this very minute, supervising the structural retrofit of a building that would, in 18 months, become the global headquarters of a hedge fund worth roughly the GDP of a small island nation. I did not say that the firm doing the architectural design on that building was mine, that I had founded it 8 years ago in a one-bedroom in Long Island City with a folding table and a second-hand drafting lamp, and that we were, as of last Tuesday, in the final stretch of a contract negotiation worth $62 million. I did not say any of that, because in this house I am the one who plates the crab cakes. That's the deal. That's always been the deal. My brother came in then with his hands in his pockets the way he does when he's about to ask for something. He's 2 years younger than me, and somehow he has always been the older one. The expected one. The son. He has my father's jaw and my mother's certainty and exactly 0 of the talent he believes himself to possess. "Hey, Mom wants to know if you can do that thing with the lemon zest on the dessert plates. Brielle's parents are going to be here in an hour and she really wants it to look nice." "Sure," I said. "You're the best, sis." He kissed the top of my head and went away. I stood there with a hand on the counter for a moment, because there is a specific exhaustion that comes from being thanked for things you were never given the option to refuse, and it had been a long week, and I had not slept properly in 9 days because of the contract. And the lemon zest was going to require me to find a microplane in this kitchen that I had not used since I was 19 years old. I found the microplane. I zested 4 lemons. I plated the desserts. Halfway through, I needed the bathroom, and the powder room off the foyer was occupied, so I went down the hall toward the one near my father's study. The hallway was carpeted in that thick cream wool that swallows footsteps, which is why the people in the study did not hear me coming. The door was cracked maybe 2 inches. I would have walked right past it. I heard my own name. It is a strange thing hearing your own name spoken in a room you weren't invited to. There's a small electrical shock to it. My feet stopped without my permission. And you understand the timing has to be exact. The board meeting is on the 11th. That was my father's voice. My father, who had retired 4 years ago from a long and respectable career in commercial real estate, and who spent most of his days now playing golf and giving my brother bad business advice. I have a contact at the firm. A second voice, male, unfamiliar, the kind of clipped East Coast accent that suggests someone wants you to know where they went to college. He can get me a preliminary copy of the bid. Once I have the numbers, we undercut by 8%, maybe 10. 10 is too aggressive, they'll smell it. 8 then, 8 is plausible. I was not breathing. I had pressed myself, without thinking, against the wall beside the door. The way you do in a dream where you're trying to disappear into the wallpaper. What about her people? My brother's voice, he was in there. My brother was in there. They'll know the bid was leaked. They'll suspect, they won't prove. And by the time they regroup, the client will have signed with us. Listen, this is a one-time chance. The Meridian Project is the largest commercial commission in this corridor in a decade. We get that. Your firm is on the map. We get that. You're not playing in your sister's shadow anymore. And Mom and Dad get their investment back, my brother said, and then some. I want to say I stood there in righteous fury. I want to say I burst in. What actually happened is that I went very cold from my scalp to my fingertips, and I walked in complete silence back down the hall to the kitchen, and I picked up the microplane and the next lemon, and I zested it with hands that did not shake at all. Because if they had started shaking, I would not have been able to stop them. My brother had a firm, I knew that. My parents had given him $800,000 3 years ago to start an architectural firm of his own, because my mother had explained at the time he had so much potential and just needed a leg up. I had not asked for a leg up when I started mine, and I had not been offered one. I had been told, the year I graduated, that I should perhaps consider becoming a teacher, because the hours were better, and I could still have a family someday. My firm had been built on a credit card and a second job waiting tables, and the kind of stubborn that doesn't have a name. My brother's firm, as far as I was aware, had so far produced 2 finished projects in 3 years, both of them residential renovations for friends of my parents. It had never, to my knowledge, bid on a commercial commission. It certainly had never bid on a $62 million one. The Meridian Project. My project, the hedge fund, 8% under, and they would win it, not because they were better, because they would know my number. I plated the last dessert, the lemon zest curled in tiny gold ribbons over the panna cotta. My mother came in and made a little please sound and said something about how I really did have a gift. And I smiled at her and I carried the desserts out, one tray at a time, and I shook hands with my brother's fiancé's parents. And I told my brother congratulations. And I meant it the way you mean it when you're already thinking about something else. I drove home that night. I did not stay over the way my mother had wanted me to. I told her there was something at work. She made a face that meant of course there is, and I let her make it. In the car on the dark stretch of the Merritt, I called my fiancé and I told him everything. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to think." I thought for 3 days. On the morning of the 4th day, I called my attorney, a woman who has been with my firm since the 2nd year and who has the calmest voice of anyone I have ever met. I told her what I had heard. I told her, also, that I had remembered something useful, which was that my father's study has a small smart speaker on the desk, the kind that listens for a wake word, and that my father is, to a degree that has occasionally embarrassed the family, deeply non-technical. I told her that I had reason to suspect the speaker's voice history might be enlightening, if anyone with appropriate authority were ever to subpoena it. She said, very calmly, "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Tell me about this contact at your firm." I had been thinking about that too. There were 4 people on the bid team who would have access to the preliminary numbers. 3 of them had been with me for over 5 years. One was a project manager I had hired 8 months ago. A man with an excellent resume and a slightly too firm handshake who had been recommended to me by an industry acquaintance who, I now recalled, played golf at the same club as my father. "His name's Whitford," I said. "Bryce Whitford. Has he had access to the final Meridian numbers?" "He's had access to the preliminary working file. Not the final bid. We haven't generated the final bid yet." There was a pause. I could hear her thinking. I could practically hear her smiling. "Then let's generate 2. That is how it began, the thing I am about to tell you about, which my attorney and I came to refer to between ourselves as the long lemon. We built a second bid, a shadow bid. The numbers in it were 8 to 10% higher than the numbers we actually intended to submit. We placed this shadow bid in the working file Bryce Whitford had access to. We placed the real bid, the actual one, in a separate file that lived on my laptop in the laptops of 3 people I would have trusted with my life. Then we waited. In the meantime, I did other things. I quietly retained a second law firm, a litigation outfit with a specialty in trade secret theft and tortious interference. I had my IT director run a forensic audit on every device Whitford had touched. I had my office manager pull his expense reports for the past 6 months. I noted, with a kind of grim satisfaction that is not really satisfaction at all, that he had taken 3 lunches at a steakhouse in Midtown that I happened to know my brother frequented. I noted other things, too. My mother called me twice in those weeks, both times to ask whether I might be able to come up for dinner on a Sunday, because my brother was going through a stressful time at work and could use the family around him. My father, who almost never called once, ostensibly to ask whether I knew anyone good for reshingling a roof. I told him I would think about it. I noted the strangeness of these calls, the slight pressure behind them, the way my parents were keeping tabs on me without ever quite seeming to. I noted that I had been, my entire adult life, a person they thought about only when they needed something. I noted that I had loved them anyway, that I had cooked their Thanksgivings, that I had picked up prescriptions when my mother had her knee done, that I had paid, without ever telling anyone, the property tax on the Greenwich house the year my father's investments had taken a bad turn. I had done these things because I could not figure out how to stop loving people who had never quite learned how to love me back. I want to be clear here that I was not angry. Anger came later. In those weeks before the Meridian bid opened, I was something cleaner than angry. I was awake. The bid opened on a Tuesday in early March. The client convened a presentation meeting in the conference room of their interim offices, a glass-walled box on the 42nd floor of a building in Midtown with a view of the East River and the bridges. I knew this room. My firm had designed the build-out. I arrived 20 minutes early with my project lead and my head of design and two of the most expensive attorneys in New York. We sat down. We waited. My brother's firm was scheduled to present second. They arrived with my brother and a man I assumed was Bryce Whitford's actual employer in this scheme, a heavy-set man in a bad suit whom I did not recognize and did not need to. Behind them, to my genuine and complete astonishment, were my parents. My mother was wearing the gray cashmere coat she had bought herself for her 60th birthday. My father was wearing the tie I had given him for Christmas the year I made my first six-figure profit, which he had told me at the time was nice but not really his color. They did not see me right away. They were too busy looking pleased with themselves. My brother saw me. He went a particular shade of pale that I had previously only seen on him once, the summer he was 15 and crashed my father's car into a stone wall. His mouth opened slightly. He closed it. My mother followed his gaze and her face did something I will remember for the rest of my life. It rearranged itself, in stages, from social brightness through confusion to a kind of sealed-up blankness. She nodded at me, the small social nod you give someone you don't quite want to acknowledge in public. I nodded back. "What are you doing here?" my brother said quietly, when he reached the chair across from mine. "I was about to ask you the same thing." The client's representatives came in then, 4 of them led by a woman whose name I will not give here, but whom I will describe as one of the most respected real estate developers in the country. A woman who in the trade press is sometimes called the architect of the East Side because of the sheer volume of significant projects she has shepherded. She is in her early 60s. She has very direct eyes. She had taken 3 meetings with me over the past 4 months, and at the most recent of them she had told me, in private, that she had personally lobbied her board to consider my firm. She walked into the room. She saw me. She smiled. She walked the length of the table and shook my hand first, before anyone else's. And she said, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear, because she is that kind of woman, "I have been looking forward to this all week. It is a genuine privilege to be working with you." I watched my mother's face out of the corner of my eye. The blankness cracked. "Working with?" my brother said. It came out smaller than he probably meant it to. The developer turned mildly. "She is not a woman who is used to being interrupted." "I'm sorry? You said working with." "Yes. We finalized the selection committee's recommendation on Friday. The contract goes to the board next week for formal ratification, but the decision is made." She looked from him to me, to the heavy-set man in the bad suit, and back. "I assumed you were here for the courtesy presentation, the runner-up review. Is that not why your firm is here?" "We," said the heavy-set man, "were under the impression that the bids were still open. The bids closed Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern." She tilted her head slightly. "You did receive the email." There was a long, terrible silence. My brother looked at his shoes. The heavy-set man looked at my brother. The developer, who I should mention had been told the entire story of the Long Lemon by my attorney 2 weeks earlier, and who, I would later learn, had personally requested that this meeting be scheduled with both firms in the room, because she wanted, in her words, to see their faces, smiled again, the smile of a woman who has been waiting a long time for a particular moment. "In any case," she said, "congratulations on your selection. We're honored to be partnered with the most innovative firm in this market. Shall we sit down and discuss timelines?" My mother said my name, not loudly, just said it. The way you say a word you have suddenly realized you don't know the meaning of. I looked at her. I let myself look at her for a long moment. Then I sat down at the head of the table and I opened my folder and I said to the developer, "Thank you. I think we should start with the phasing schedule." We did not discuss the phasing schedule. Not yet, because my attorney, who had been sitting very quietly to my left the entire time, chose that moment to slide 3 sealed envelopes across the polished walnut tabletop. One to my brother, one to the heavy-set man, one to my father, who had not until that moment been addressed by anyone in the room, and who picked the envelope up with a hand that visibly trembled. "Those," my attorney said, "are formal cease and desist notices. They are accompanied by a summary of the evidence we have collected regarding the unauthorized acquisition and use of proprietary bid information from my client's firm and a preliminary statement of damages. You will note that the evidence includes recovered communications from a Mr. Bryce Whitford, who, as of this morning, has agreed to cooperate fully with our internal investigation and with any subsequent law enforcement inquiry. He has also provided sworn testimony regarding the source of his instructions and the source of certain unreported payments deposited into a joint account he holds with his wife." She paused. She is very good at pausing. "My client has not yet decided whether to pursue criminal charges. The decision will be made within 30 days. In the interim, I would strongly advise all 3 of you to retain counsel and to refrain from any further contact with my client or with any employee, vendor or client of my client's firm." My father set the envelope down very carefully, the way you set down something you think might explode. My mother said my name again. I said, "Not now." The developer cleared her throat pleasantly. "Shall we give these gentlemen a moment to gather their things?" They gathered their things. My brother did not look at me. My father did not look at me. My mother looked at me the entire time, the entire long walk from the table to the door, and I made myself meet her eyes, and what I saw in them was not love and not even anger, but a kind of dawning private horror, the look of a woman who is just now understanding, after 31 years, that she had been wrong about something important, and that the thing she had been wrong about could not be unbroken. The door closed behind them. The developer poured herself a glass of water. "Well," she said, "shall we?" We talked for 2.5 hours. We discussed the phasing schedule. We discussed the materials palette. We discussed a public art component that I had been wanting to propose for months and that she loved on first hearing. I walked out of that building at 4 in the afternoon with a contract that would change the trajectory of my firm for the next decade, and I sat in the back of a town car going downtown and I cried for about 90 seconds, which was as long as I was willing to give it. And then I called my fiancé and told him I was on my way home. I am going to tell you the part you want to know, which is what happened with my family. Although the truth is that the answer is not very dramatic. My brother's firm did not survive. The cease and desist was, in the end, the smaller part of the consequence. The Whitford testimony triggered an investigation by the state licensing board, and my brother's license was suspended pending review and then revoked. The heavyset man, who turned out to be a developer with a long and not very clean record of cutting corners, agreed to a settlement that involved him paying my firm a substantial amount of money and agreeing in writing never to do business in the state again. We did not pursue criminal charges. My attorney advised against it. The optics, she said, would be worse than the payoff. I trusted her on that. My parents lost a great deal, not financially, although they lost some of that too because they had quietly co-signed a line of credit for my brother's firm that came due in the wreckage and had to be paid out of their retirement accounts. What they lost mostly was the version of themselves they had been carrying around for 30 years, the version in which they were the kind of parents who had raised good children, the version in which their golden son was building a legacy and their daughter was helpful in the kitchen. They lost that. I think it was the hardest thing they had ever lost. My mother wrote me a letter about 6 months later. It was 4 pages long on the cream stationery she has used my whole life. She apologized for many things. She apologized for many things. She apologized for things I had not known she remembered. She apologized for the kitchen and for the teacher comment when I graduated and for a moment at my 8th birthday party that I had not thought about in 20 years but that, when she described it, came back to me with terrible clarity. She did not ask me to forgive her. She said she did not expect that. She said she was writing because she had realized late that she had not been the mother I deserved, and that this was true regardless of whether I ever read the letter or responded to it. I read it 3 times. I put it in a drawer. I have not yet written back. I do not know if I will. The honest truth is that I love her, and I do not trust her, and I am not sure those two things can ever again live in the same room together. I am working on it. I do not know what working on it will produce. My father has not written. My brother has not written. I do not expect either of them to. I got married last fall in a small ceremony in the garden of the house my husband and I bought together upstate. My in-laws were there. My closest friends. The 3 people from my firm I would have trusted with my life, who I now trust with the next 10 years of my life. My mother was not invited. I am still working out whether that was the right call. I think it was. Some days I am sure of it. Some days less so. The Meridian project broke ground in April. It will be finished in 2 years. The first time I walked the construction site, in a hard hat and steel-toed boots, with the dust of the demolition still hanging in the morning light, I thought about the woman I had been a year earlier, plating crab cakes in my mother's kitchen, and I felt, in a way I had not expected, a kind of tenderness toward her. She did not know yet what she was about to do. She did not know yet that she was allowed to do it. I want to tell her, that woman, what I have learned. I want to tell her that the people who only see you as useful will never see you as whole, and that you cannot earn your way into being seen by them, no matter how many lemons you zest. I want to tell her that the love you have given to people who could not return it is not wasted, but it is also not a debt that obligates you to keep paying it. I want to tell her that walking away is not the same as failing, and that sometimes the most generous thing you can do for the people who hurt you is to stop pretending they didn't. I want to tell her that her hands, the ones she thought were only good for plating other people's parties, were going to build something that would still be standing long after she was gone. I want to tell her she was allowed. That is what I would say if I could go back to that kitchen. I would set down the microplane. I would take off the apron. I would look my mother in the eye, the way I learned to in that conference room a few months later. And I would say, kindly and clearly, I am not who you think I am. I never was. And I am done waiting for you to figure that out. I would walk out of that kitchen. I would not look back. I have thought about that hallway more times than I can count. The cream carpet. The cracked door. The 2 inches of space between me and a different life. If I had needed the bathroom 30 seconds earlier or 30 seconds later, none of it would have happened. I would still be plating crab cakes for strangers in my mother's kitchen, smiling politely while a woman I had never met asked me for another glass of Pinot. The hinge of an entire life swinging on the smallest accident of timing. But I don't actually believe it was an accident. Not anymore. I believe that when you spend years building yourself in private, quietly, without applause, the world eventually finds a way to put you in the room where you need to be standing. Not because the universe owes you anything, because the work you did when no one was watching made you ready for a moment that other people would have walked right past. I walked past that door because my feet stopped. My feet stopped because some part of me had been listening for that conversation my entire life, even before I knew it existed. The thing I want to say, to anyone who recognizes this story in their own kitchen, in their own family, is that being underestimated is not the worst thing that can happen to you. The worst thing is believing the people who underestimate you. My brother is not a bad man. I have come to understand that. He is a man who was handed a version of himself he could not live up to, and rather than build a better one, he reached for the easiest weapon at hand, which was me. My parents are not monsters either. They are people who decided early what each of their children was for and then spent the next 30 years refusing to revise that decision in the face of mounting evidence. That refusal cost them everything they thought they were keeping safe. There is a kind of strength that comes only from being overlooked. You learn to work without permission. You learn to celebrate without an audience. You learn that the proof of your worth is not a verdict that someone else gets to deliver. By the time the developer shook my hand in that conference room, I had already known for years what I was. Her words were lovely. They were not necessary. That is what I want you to take from this. The validation you are waiting for from the people who refuse to give it is not the validation that will change your life. The validation that changes your life is the quiet one you give yourself every morning when you sit down and do the work anyway. If you are in a kitchen tonight, plating someone else's party, your hands tired and your name unspoken, listen to me. Keep going. Keep bullying the thing they cannot see. Be honest. Be patient. Be unbearably good at what you do. The room you are meant to walk into is being built right now, somewhere ahead of you. You will know it when you arrive. You will not need anyone to tell you that you belong there. You are always allowed.